Britain did not survive the summer of 1940 because it was ready. It survived because it had no other choice. Between May 26 and June 4, Operation Dynamo pulled more than 338,000 Allied soldiers off the beaches of Dunkirk. Newspapers called it a triumph. Churchill called it a miracle. What those headlines quietly ignored was the cost of that escape. The British Expeditionary Force returned home almost empty-handed. Tens of thousands of rifles, over 2,400 artillery guns, nearly 64,000 vehicles, and 500,000 tons of ammunition and supplies were abandoned in France. Britain saved its men, and lost nearly everything they needed to fight. The reality that followed was terrifying. By June 1940, the entire United Kingdom possessed fewer than 500,000 rifles. That was all that stood between the island and a German army that had crushed France in 6 weeks. Newly formed local defense volunteers, soon renamed the Home Guard, trained with broomsticks, golf clubs, and pipes. This was not myth. War Office documents confirmed that some units had 1 rifle for 6 men, with only 5 rounds of ammunition each. Communities melted iron railings for scrap. Gamekeepers donated shotguns. Britain was improvising for survival. Across the Channel, Germany was preparing Operation Sea Lion. Hundreds of thousands of troops gathered along the French and Belgian coasts. Invasion barges lined the harbors. Luftwaffe intelligence believed the RAF could be neutralized within a month. Historians still debate whether Sea Lion could have succeeded, but in 1940, Britain could not afford doubt. If the invasion came, the arithmetic was brutal. British industry simply could not keep up. Even at full output, the Enfield factory produced only 25,000 rifles per month. The Thompson submachine gun was effective, but at 32 pounds per unit, it was far too expensive and dependent on American factories already under strain. German designs like the MP-38 and MP-40 required precision machining Britain could not spare. What the country needed was not a refined weapon. It needed something fast, cheap, and brutally simple. The War Office's demand bordered on impossible. A submachine gun that could be built by unskilled labor using non-critical materials for under 5 pounds per unit and delivered in months, not years. Somewhere inside the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield Lock, 2 men were already working toward an answer. Major Reginald Vernon Shepherd, a career officer shaped by the mud and chaos of the First World War, understood how weapons failed under real conditions. Perfection, he believed, was useless if it could not survive dirt, stress, and abuse. Harold John Turpin, a younger civilian draftsman, brought something just as important: an exact understanding of what British factories could realistically produce at scale. Together, they shared a single guiding principle: good enough now beats perfect later. Studying German designs and crude resistance weapons, they stripped the submachine gun down to its essentials. The low-pressure 9mm cartridge allowed loose tolerances. Wood stocks vanished, replaced by bent metal tubing. Precision receivers gave way to simple steel pipes. Complex mechanisms were discarded until only the bare minimum remained. By January 1941, their prototype was complete. It looked less like a conventional firearm and more like something assembled from plumbing parts. And that was exactly the point. What they produced was barely recognizable as a conventional firearm. The weapon's main body was nothing more than a steel tube. The barrel was locked in place by a crude collar. A box magazine jutted out from the left side, an unconventional choice that kept the profile low when firing prone but would later become a source of constant trouble. The folding metal stock looked improvised, more like camping furniture than military hardware. Officially, the War Office labeled it the machine carbine, 9mm, STEN, a name formed from Shepherd, Turpin, and Enfield, though who proposed it remains unclear. Initial testing at Enfield confirmed the essential goal had been met. The gun worked. More importantly, it could be built fast. The entire design consisted of just 47 parts, compared to over 80 in a Thompson. A trained worker could assemble one in 5 hours. An unskilled laborer, following instructions, needed only a little longer. Production of the first models began in mid-1941, even as Shepherd and Turpin continued simplifying the design further. By the time the Mark II entered production, the STEN had become something entirely new and deeply unpopular. It was crude, awkward, and unlike anything soldiers trusted. Yet the numbers were staggering. A single STEN cost less than £3 to manufacture, a fraction of the Thompson's price and even cheaper than the American M3. It was not merely inexpensive, it was treated as expendable. This economy came from ruthless design logic. The receiver required no complex machining, just cut tubing and stamped parts. The bolt was a solid block of steel with a fixed firing pin. The barrel was short and simple to produce. Traditional gunsmithing rules were ignored entirely. Even more radical was how it was made. Contracts were scattered across civilian industry. Motorcycle factories, toy makers, sewing machine plants, all turned out STEN components. By late 1941, production reached 20,000 guns per week, doubling within months. Bombing one factory no longer mattered. Dozens more filled the gap. But speed and simplicity carried a price, and soldiers paid it. The side-mounted magazine caused persistent feeding failures. The single-column 32-round magazine relied on a spring that weakened quickly. Jams were common. Troops learned to load only 28 rounds, sacrificing firepower for reliability. Even then, stoppages never fully disappeared. Worse was the safety, if it deserved the name. A simple slot in the receiver held the bolt in place. A sharp knock could jar it loose, firing the weapon without a trigger pull. Accidental discharges became routine. The STEN earned brutal nicknames: Plumber's Nightmare, Woolworth Special, Stench Gun. Most telling was the one whispered across training camps, the gun that shoots around corners. Official reports from 1942 and 1943 documented hundreds of accidental firings. Some were fatal. Morale collapsed. Units openly requested replacements, even obsolete Great War weapons. Instructors warned that recruits feared their own guns more than the enemy. By early 1942, serious voices questioned whether the entire program had been a mistake. The technical cause was simple and unforgiving. The STEN fired from an open bolt. Any hard impact could release it. Combined with a fragile magazine design and dirt-sensitive side feed, the weapon was dangerously unpredictable. In deserts, sand crippled it. In training camps, careless movement killed men. And yet, far from British drill squares, another group was watching closely. Inside an organization that officially did not exist, planners saw something different. The Special Operations Executive, created to ignite resistance across occupied Europe, recognized that the STEN's flaws were irrelevant to their war. They did not need elegance. They needed disposable firepower. A gun that could be hidden, repaired by amateurs, copied anywhere, and abandoned without regret. The very features soldiers hated made it perfect for sabotage. The side magazine allowed firing from impossible positions. The skeletal stock could be removed entirely. Reduced to its core, the STEN could disappear under a coat or inside a suitcase. And that was when the STEN finally found the role it had been born for. That audience appeared sooner than anyone at the War Office expected. By mid-1942, the Special Operations Executive was requesting STENs in quantities that raised eyebrows. These weapons were not meant for British troops at all. They were packed into cylindrical containers, loaded aboard Halifax bombers, and dropped into darkness over occupied Europe. The STEN was finally heading toward people who valued its strange strengths. So he operated from an unremarkable building at 64 Baker Street, a coincidence the staff enjoyed, calling themselves the Baker Street Irregulars. Their mission was deadly serious: sabotage, subversion, and resistance behind enemy lines. For that war, conventional military priorities meant little. Accuracy and finish mattered less than concealment, simplicity, and disposability. As Wing Commander F.F. Yeo Thomas later explained, a Thompson was superior on paper, but useless in practice. It was heavy, expensive, and impossible to repair in a farmhouse or cellar. A STEN could be broken down into pieces small enough to hide in a bicycle frame, reassembled in minutes, and abandoned without regret. The first major STEN drops began in late 1942. Special duty squadrons flew night missions over France, Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and Poland. Containers landed at fields marked by torch signals arranged in precise patterns. In 1942 alone, SOE delivered roughly 37,000 weapons. The following year, that number exceeded 100,000, with the STEN forming the backbone of resistance firepower. But airdrops were never enough. German air defenses improved. Drop zones were compromised. Weather cancelled missions without warning. SOE's solution was audacious. Instead of shipping weapons, they would ship knowledge. Beginning in early 1943, selected drops included technical drawings and manufacturing instructions, translated into local languages. These documents explained not just how the STEN worked, but how loosely it could be made. Which tolerances mattered. Which parts could be improvised. Which steps required skill, and which did not. The results surpassed expectations. Across occupied Europe, resistance workshops began producing local STEN variants. Some closely copied the British original. Others adapted it to local materials, tools, and needs. Quality varied, but function rarely did. In several regions, locally manufactured STENs eventually outnumbered airdropped weapons. German intelligence took notice. Reports surfaced of STENs appearing in areas with no known supply routes. Attempts to interdict production failed. The weapon's crude design, once mocked by British soldiers, had become a strategic nightmare for occupation forces. Nowhere was this more evident than Denmark. Flat, exposed, and densely populated, Denmark seemed the worst possible place for clandestine manufacturing. Yet beneath the surface, Danish resistance fighters built one of the most effective underground arms operations of the war. The effort centered on a legitimate Copenhagen machine tool firm that quietly diverted materials, labor, and expertise. After receiving SOE documentation, engineer Jens Halbo immediately recognized the brilliance of the design. The STEN was not a traditional firearm, it was an industrial product. Every component could be made with equipment already scattered across the city. Production was deliberately fragmented. No single site made a complete weapon. Tubes came from one shop, barrels from another, springs from a third. Final assembly shifted constantly. Basements, attics, farms, even a funeral parlor. Raids uncovered only innocent-looking parts. Workers knew only their own task. Finished weapons vanished within hours. By late 1943, Danish workshops were producing hundreds of STENs each month. Total output likely exceeded 20,000 weapons before liberation. The cost was severe: arrests, executions, deportations, but production never fully stopped. When danger rose, operations paused, relocated, and resumed. SOE circulated reports of the Danish success across Europe. The lesson was unmistakable. If STENs could be built under occupation in Denmark, they could be built anywhere. Nowhere was that lesson more urgently needed than Poland. By 1943, the Polish Home Army numbered in the hundreds of thousands, preparing for a future uprising. External supply was unreliable. Flights were long, losses heavy, and deliveries sporadic. Polish planners understood that survival depended on local production. STEN samples reached Warsaw through every channel imaginable: airdrops, captured stockpiles, even diplomatic routes through neutral Sweden. By the spring of 1943, Polish engineers were already examining them in hidden workshops. And what they were about to create would push the STEN's legacy even further. What emerged in Poland pushed the STEN concept further than anyone in Britain had imagined. Polish engineers developed their own variant, known as the Błyskawica, lightning. While clearly descended from the STEN, it corrected several weaknesses. The magazine housing was reinforced to reduce feeding failures. The stock was redesigned for concealment. Most importantly, a simple selector was added, allowing single-shot fire, something the British weapon never possessed. Before the Warsaw Uprising of August 1944, roughly 700 units were produced. During 63 days of brutal street fighting, these weapons saw constant use. The uprising was ultimately crushed, but surviving examples of the Błyskawica remain among Poland's most treasured wartime artifacts. Elsewhere, resistance production followed different paths. In France, fragmentation worked to the resistance's advantage. Multiple networks, Gaullist, Communist, and Independent, operated simultaneously. This created parallel manufacturing efforts that were difficult for German security services to suppress. Workshops in central and southern France improvised relentlessly, repurposing bicycle tools, farm equipment, and even hand pumps to weld steel. The results were crude but functional. By June 1944, locally produced STENs were widespread, supplementing SOE airdrops during the lead-up to Normandy. Norway, with its small population and intense surveillance, managed only limited production, perhaps a few thousand weapons in total. Norwegian variants often featured longer barrels, better suited to mountainous terrain. In the Netherlands, access to advanced machinery allowed resistance groups to produce some of the finest clandestine STENs in Europe, though many workshops were eventually discovered and destroyed. Taken together, these efforts were transformative. Conservative estimates suggest that resistance movements manufactured 75,000 to 100,000 STEN or STEN-derived weapons between 1943 and 1945. Combined with roughly 150,000 airdropped arms, occupied Europe possessed a level of submachine gun firepower German authorities never anticipated and could not contain. The irony was complete. A weapon British soldiers had ridiculed became the backbone of armed resistance. By war's end, British factories had produced roughly 3.75 million STENs, Canada added over 130,000, and resistance workshops pushed total production beyond 4 million. Only the Soviet PPSH-41 exceeded it. Even Germany took notice. As Allied bombing crippled industrial capacity, German engineers abandoned traditional precision standards and produced the MP-3008, a near copy of the STEN. That the nation which pioneered modern submachine guns ended the war imitating Britain's crudest design spoke volumes. The STEN did not disappear in 1945. It surfaced in post-war insurgencies, colonial conflicts, and independence struggles. Its philosophy, cheap, simple, locally manufacturable, shaped generations of irregular weapons. From clandestine Israeli workshops in 1948 to later insurgent designs worldwide, the lineage was unmistakable. Historians still argue whether the STEN was inspired pragmatism or reckless compromise. Both views are valid. It killed men accidentally. It jammed. Soldiers distrusted it. Yet it armed an occupied continent when nothing else could. Shepard and Turpin never became famous. Their reward was not recognition or wealth, but impact. They understood something essential at Britain's darkest moment. A flawless weapon delivered too late is useless. An ugly weapon delivered now can change history. And for those who built STENs in basements, barns, and cellars, knowing discovery meant death, the truth was simpler still. When survival is the goal, the weapon that exists is always better than the weapon that does not.